So I've been thinking a lot lately about the idea of a good man. And I actually was going to write a post called Death of a Good Man. And it was basically going to be a treatise on saying farewell to the egoic concept of what it means to be a good man. But then I decided that whatever I was going to say, it had to go a little bit deeper than that and not just personal. And so I decided to rename this video Deconstructing the Myth of a Good Man, or Deconstructing the Good Man Myth. And so when I think about a good man, or whatever a good man is supposed to be, I think back to a conversation I had with my dad when I was in my 20s. And for all intents and purposes, as much as I loved my dad, and even at one time when I would think of Jesus, I would think of my dad. I don't know why, just being honest. When I would hear about Jesus in church, I'd always imagine my dad, because my dad had moved away, and I had basically projected whatever I wanted a dad to be onto Jesus. And so whenever I did that, I would see my dad's image when I would think about Jesus. And eventually, though, I was able to connect the dots that my dad was not Jesus, maybe very far from Jesus. But I was also, by some grace, able to be curious about why I projected such goodness onto my dad, so much so that I would imagine Jesus as my dad. Hi, Rev David Alexander. Thanks for being up here. And so I started to ask myself questions about why was I projecting onto this idea of Jesus the image of my actual father. And I knew that it was because my father wasn't physically there, but somehow psychologically, it made me want to go to church all the time. It made me want to read the Bible all the time, because in some way I felt like I was getting close to this projection that I had put onto the idea of a Jesus, um, as a proxy for my dad. And so I wanted to be as Christ-like as possible. And at the same time, there was a little bit of myself that wanted my biological dad to see me in a certain light, to be proud of me, or to think that I was a good son or something like that. Unfortunately, the counter to that was that my mom was very pissed at my dad for the choices he had made and why they got divorced and everything. And so my mom had this different projection where she was projecting onto me, "You're going to be just like your trifling daddy," was the projection that my mom put on me. And so I had these two projections at war within me. And then eventually I decided that I would forego the association with my biological dad and used him as a type of like who not to be like, for the most part, except for being able to hold down a job and pay bills. And then everything else was to try my best to have this aspiration to be as close to like Jesus as I could get myself to be, given life circumstances. And that would equal a good man. So I put in effort. I tried to be respectful to women and to my mom, and try to just do quote unquote the right things. And yet I kept getting grief upon grief upon grief. And for lots of different reasons, I was challenged by the systems I was in. A lot of complications that you can look at other videos about, but a lot of it was always kind of test my manhood, because I was trying to be Christ-like, which in the hood did not go over very well. So I was always trying to forgive people and love my neighbors, myself, and turn the other cheek, because I was trying so hard to follow the teachings of Jesus, because I had projected this father figure onto Jesus. And then my neighborhood was asking other things of me, saying, telling me other ways that I was supposed to be, and other ways that a man was supposed to be. And so the struggle was going on and on inside of me. And I continued to choose, even when I failed, because there were some times where I failed. There's some times where I really almost went the way of the hood, and everything like that, on a bunch of different levels. But I kept on trying to aim towards this Christ ideal. And then at one point, my dad uh, called me over to him, like to Mississippi, and we were talking. He said, "Pedro, you are what they call a good man." And when he told me I was a good man, I felt this feeling like, yeah, I did it. I pulled it off. My dad sees me as the good man that I wanted to be. Except for that wasn't the end of my dad's sentence. Because what my dad followed up by saying was, which is another way of saying a fool. And then I was heartbroken. And he told me, you know, all you're doing is creating grief for yourself, trying to be a good man because yada, yada, yada. And my dad said many misogynistic things and other things to follow that. And so that pissed me off and made me want to double down to be this quote unquote good man. Meanwhile, I suffered for it. And I suffered for it and I suffered for it. I suffered for it in my relationships. I suffered for it in my church. I suffered for it in my jobs. Always trying to do the right thing. Always trying to turn the other cheek. Always trying to do the things that I thought was Christ-like, and taking it very, very seriously. And all it did was bring me extreme amounts of grief, mostly from Christians. And I couldn't understand why until I realized one day, after much, much failure, that the idea of a good man is a myth. It's a moving target. It's set up by structures outside of ourselves that call us to look out of ourselves and to then try to get approval from these systems, externalized systems, and then measure ourselves against this externality to see if we're doing it right. Or am I being a good man? And I've noticed that plenty of times in my life, but even more so now that I'm raising daughters, and one of which is now an adult. And when she talks to me about men, I struggle when I talk to her because I tell her, it's going to be rare for you to find a man who doesn't care more about what other men think than what you think. That is going to, because men, in my experience, many men look outside of themselves for validation from other men. And it doesn't matter who the men are, if they're in certain groups, they don't know what a good man is. And so they're looking at other men who also don't know what it means to be a good man to figure out if they're being a good man or not. And then they look and say, is it provider? And I've said this before, that the three things that most of our society want from men is they want them to be three things: a provider, a protector, and a punching bag. And what I mean by punching bag, just to express it, is they want us to be able to take all the hits of life without yelping. They want us to be able to take all the hits, all the abuse, all the everything, and then to somehow be a man and not complain, not get sad, not have feelings, not do anything while simultaneously being a provider and a protector. And if you can't be a provider or a protector, then you got to be the ultimate punching bag. And that is a sad state of affairs for men, for women, for society, for everyone. Because until we create systems where men can show up as their whole selves, which includes their emotions, which includes their feelings, which includes being hurt, which includes being vulnerable, which includes failure, which includes being weak, and all these other things, our systems are always going to try to navigate the weak. And I don't mean this in a harsh way, I'm just saying directly, a weak male ego that's looking for external validation to see if they're being a good man the right way. And if they can't do it, then they're going to reject the whole thing and be the opposite of whatever they think a good man is. But it's all a mythology. There's so many things that at one time, like at first, it used to be whoever could protect the most was the good man, like the hunter, the murderer, the person who could protect their family from getting killed and to keep their DNA going. That was the real man, the good man, or whatever the case may be. But then we started creating systems like agriculture and all these other things. And we started writing books and inventing, and with all these other things, changed the idea of what it meant to be a good man. And all of a sudden, you had to be educated. You had to be this, you had to be that. And it was constantly trying to figure out, what do you do to be a good man? But there's no such thing as it. It's constantly a moving target. And that's why I think that the real work has to be internal. As I was reflecting on it before I started making this video, which I have no prep work, I'm just kind of talking because I've been working on this men's retreat that I'm gonna be doing soon, and I've been thinking about the men's retreats that I've been doing in the past, and how many men I've seen that have been broken on so many levels, but they won't speak into it. And I'll say for myself, one of the one of the great things about trying to follow Christ, even when I was a fundamentalist and evangelical, one of the patterns of it was that the Jesus pattern showed vulnerability. the Jesus pattern, he was able to both be this his ideal spiritual self, but he was also able to say, my God, why have you forsaken me? Is it possible this cup can pass from me? How much longer do I have to put up with you? He flipped tables, he wept. He showed all these different levels of vulnerability and emotion while simultaneously being in alignment or in oneness with all that is God, the creator, whatever you want to call it. And I think that that is because um, the real work of being whatever a man is being a man in the moment that you're in means being able to go from that internal reservoir of life, of oneness, of responding to the moment appropriately. Because there are times, just like it says in Ecclesiastes, there's a time and a place for everything. There's a time to cry, there's a time to laugh, there's a time. And I think that being a man, a real man, whatever that means, is to be present with what is, to show up in consciousness when whatever situation you're up to without, or you're holding on to, or excuse me, whatever situation you find yourself in, but without attachment, and being able to love fully and wholly and fiercely, and being able to pour yourself out and give yourself fully to the moment you're in, and saying, even nevertheless, not my will but thine, not from an externalized God that says I want you to die, just like not that sort of thing, but just realizing what is true for the moment, what is true when you're giving all that you are to the moment that you're in. And the mythology is that there's such a thing as a static real man that always shows up in the same way all the time, predictable. And I think that we get that projection because we tell this untruth. We always say, not we, but a lot of people say in religious circles that God is the same yesterday, today, and never going to change, and all other stuff like that. I don't think that's true, because I think that we are a microcosm of how God is. And so, as people, as we live our lives and mature and we learn and we grow and we develop and we expand, perpetually, if we're conscious and we're paying attention, we're always doing that. I think God is also always doing that, and we are always doing that. And so God does change because we change. If you remember, even if you use the old school Bible, if they say God never changes, remember when what's his name, Abraham was like gonna God was like, "Oh, I'm gonna kill all these fools," and I'm sorry if I'm just talking in regular English, but I'm gonna kill all these fools. And then God's like, he's like, "Well, what if there's a couple righteous people? What if 10 righteous people?" And they say God changed God's mind, or we say that Jesus was embodying the Christ, the God pattern, the Christ pattern, right? Which I'm going to say something else in the end if I forget, if I remember. But if we say that Jesus modeled the Christ pattern, right, or the God pattern, well, when Jesus was talking to the woman who said that he heal her daughter, and he said, "Should I give the food from the master's table to the dogs?" Then she said, "Well, doesn't the dogs eat the food that fall from the master's table?" I messed the story up a little bit, but you get my point. And then Jesus was like, "Touche," and then Jesus changed his mind. So to say that God doesn't change yesterday, today, forever, blah 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 blah, and then we project that same thing on the men, where we want this static idea of a man that always is the always static, always dependable, always providing, always, all that stuff is ignorant. And we've been projecting onto ourselves, trying to be this static thing that doesn't exist, because everything in life is flow. Nothing is static. And so being the mythological man that is always showing up, always being Rambo and being Santa Claus and being all these other things, all these myths wrapped into one, it's not a real thing. And we are killing ourselves and killing other people trying to be something that does not exist. It just doesn't exist. And so when my dad told me, "Pedro, you're what they call a good man," which is another word for a fool, he was actually right, because it's foolish for me to think that I could become some static being that shows up in the same way all the time to every situation and is always in my power, always this, always that. There's no such thing as that. There's being fully who you are in the moment you're in, giving yourself, giving your gift, giving your love, also giving your vulnerability, also saying, "Hey, you know what? I don't know how to do this. I don't know what I'm doing." And if you encounter people who say they love you and they can't allow for you to be vulnerable and allow for you to be fully into yourself, then those relationships might have to dissolve. I've experienced this firsthand, that so many people will say, well, I want somebody to tell them my feelings and this is this. And then as soon as they do, they feel uncomfortable because many of us buy into this mythological good man thing and then hold people to that standard, and we feel uncomfortable when people don't live into that standard, and it's very unfortunate for everyone, for all of our systems, all of our society, for men, for women, for people who identify in all across the gender and sexuality spectrum. All of us are struggling trying to live up to these myths. And I could say things about the myth of the good woman too, except for I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to bother to say something I don't know anything about. um, but what I can say is that from a relational standpoint, if I try to be this static, mythological good man and I don't bend and I don't break and all these other things like that, then whoever's in relationship with me, by virtue of being in connection with me, is going to have to deal with me functioning from a mythology. And so my um, effort in this moment is to tell men, because I'm a man, it's okay to let go of this myth. It's okay to figure yourself out. It's okay to not know everything. It's okay if you find yourself in a situation, especially in the world we're in right now, where you can't provide because of whatever, because it's contextual. There's so many men right now that I have talked to, that I know, that I read about, who lose their identity. Actually, I'm gonna tell you something. When I used to be a corporate recruiter, and among many other things. And during 2008 crisis, I really started to understand this mythology, interviewing a bunch of guys who were all looking for jobs. And because they lost their jobs, they lost their identity. They became no one when they didn't have a job, because their whole identity was being provider. And through providing, they were able to protect. And now that they couldn't provide, they felt like they couldn't protect. And so then they were also hurting. And that's the other part I said earlier, that the expectation of men is to be provider, protector, and punching bag. So now they're taking all the pain from not being able to provide or protect, and they can't say it. They feel like they can't say anything about it. And I know some of these men really had no life. They were dead when their job. They were just a walking dead, and that is what actually ended up leading me partially to go to seminary, because I started feeling compassion for these guys that I was talking to, and I started asking them questions, and I started realizing, because I that's one thing by grace, I never thought my identity was wrapped up in any role that I play in this world. But most men do think that. And so as soon as they lost that ability to provide and protect, and then they were in pain and they weren't able to talk about it, they were just falling apart. And it's very sad, because a lot of those guys, once they get to that situation, they don't know how to handle themselves. They don't know how to react, and there's no systems in place to help them. And so, whatever efforts that I can make to speak into this honestly, and to be able to share openly, and I know for sure that some guys, I've actually said this to some guys before, and then they'll end up saying, "Yeah, man, you sound like a bitch." Because they buy into that. Their whole identity is wrapped up into it. But I've also talked to men who end up really breaking. I know I was talking to one dude, and he lost his job and he was devastated. And this is when I was a minister. And so he ended up asking me, like, what can I do, man? Because I feel like purposeless. I feel like I want to die. Like, literally he wanted to die. And I told him, you know what you should do? And I said, just say thank you for everything. And he's like, what do you mean? I said, just keep saying thank you for everything. Just say thank you for everything, thank you for everything, thank you for everything. And he was like, what do I have to be grateful for? And I said, well, you had all this job all these other years. This could have happened to you a long ass time ago. Just say thank you for everything. Don't even try to understand it. Every time a negative thought comes up, every time you feel like I can't protect, I can't provide, all those things were, if you want to use this word, grace the whole time, because none of us were ever in control. That was an illusion. So I said, hey, man, just keep saying thank you for everything. And legitimately, he started saying thank you for everything. And he ended up taking a lesser job in the same organization. because they offered him a lesser job where he got paid less money, had worse hours, and everything like that. But he kept saying, "Thank you for everything, thank you for everything." And interestingly, some people who knew him in his former capacity started asking about him. And then his role had that he had before was something that kind of evolved, but it was never a formal structure. And then people started asking, like, what happened to the guy that did this? What happened to the guy that did that? And eventually, there was enough requests for him that they actually formalized his job and then created it as a duplicable job in other um, offices and sites within his organization. And he had to let go and surrender and admit that he was not the provider that he thought he was before, the protector, or even have to be the punching bag, but that he had to let all those identities go. And then when he let go of all those identities, he was provided for, he was protected, and all those things came to him, and so then by extension he was able to be that for other people. And I think that that is the Christ pattern. Oh, before I forget, one of the things I discovered recently, I was working on a talk because I work at the Spiritual Center, Unity Columbine Spiritual Center, and I was working on a talk and for Father's Day. And for some reason, I asked myself, is there a connection between the word paternal and the word pattern? And it turned out that there was. And there's also a connection between the word maternal and material and matter, which I was surprised. But I discovered that, and I realized that part of being paternal is just aligning oneself with the spiritual divine pattern that already exists within us. And that when we allow ourselves to be recipients of the pattern, then we show up as the only type of person that we really can be when we're present. That's a little bit of a tangent, but that's something that I realized recently when I was working on the Father's Day talk. And I wanted to share that as well because I think for a lot of men, when they're trying to look outside of themselves to find out if they're being a man right, that's the wrong way to go. But rather that they look within themselves and align themselves with the divine pattern that's already imprinted on each and every one of us of how to be. And that it exists in all of us, whether we're male or female is inconsequential. I'm just talking about men specifically because of what I feel like talking about right now. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, the perfect pattern for being paternal, I just wanted to use alliteration, the perfect pattern is already within us. And it's not something that we have to look outside of us, of ourselves to find. That's why Jesus was like, love your neighbor and love your enemy and love God with all your heart, mind, and soul, love your neighbor as yourself, and all those things, because that pattern within ourselves is what we give to the world. But we have to love ourselves enough to allow ourselves to be discovered, to make mistakes, to learn as we go, and then to give what we've learned freely because we've received it freely. And so I guess, I don't know, I don't want to overtalk the situation, but I really want to just offer that to men. I'm gonna do some more formalized things anyway. I just felt like tonight I just really wanted to do that because as a man myself, I've mostly by grace been able to provide for my family all these years. But there was times where I could provide materially way more, like 60, 70% more than what I can do right now. It's been crazy. But the richness, excuse me, the richness of what's occurring in my soul far eclipses whatever material thing I was able to provide in the past. And I was able to also face this thing because I said in the beginning of the video that some of you might have missed that I had this tension with my dad and how what it meant to be a man. And my dad had told me that I was a fool for trying to be a good man and all that stuff. Um, and but the one thing my mom said good about my dad was she was like, your dad was a blank blankety blank blank blank. But the one thing he could do was he always had a good job and could pay the bills. And so that was the one thing that I wanted to have in common with my dad. And everything else I was trying to pattern after Christ and other good men that, or quote unquote good men that I had met along the way, picking up the pieces, trying to create some kind of Frankenstein father figure for myself. So when I found myself in a situation where I was no longer able to provide at the level that I was able to do before, I had to come face to face with those things inside of myself. And I had to face that dissolution of the ego structure because I thought that I had transcended that at that point in my life. But when I wasn't able, when my paycheck went down to a fifth of what it used to be, like a fifth. When I say a fifth, I'm not exaggerating. I mean exactly a fifth of what it used to be. I had to face that thing that like I wasn't able to bring in money the way, because things in our society have changed where what I used to offer was of less value um, to our society. I um, had to face that part of myself because that was the last thing I thought I had in common with my dad. But what I realized is I had something even more in common with my dad, which was just being a human, doing the best we can. That's it. My dad had his brokenness. I have my brokenness. My dad had his vulnerabilities. I have my vulnerabilities. And we're all figuring this out. And I'm grateful that I have been able to look at these things with my eyes open, even when I'm in pain, and even when it's difficult. And I hope that in facing this with my eyes open and trying to bring spiritual principles to it and naming some of these things, that it will help some men, because there's a lot of hurt men. There's a lot of hurt people in general. That's why they say hurt people hurt people. And there's no short supply of men behaving badly. But I think it's because we don't understand how to fully live into the pattern that's already imprinted on us, the divine pattern that's already there. We're constantly looking outside of ourselves. I mean, I'm saying I don't really look outside of myself. I'm gonna be honest. I don't do it. I don't do it. I did it a little bit and it always didn't work out. But a lot of us do. A lot of men do. They literally, sadly to say, many men look outside of themselves to other men, trying to see if they're doing man right. And the ego piece is almost indomitable, because the fear of the ego death is that they will lose themselves. And if they lose themselves, how can they be the protector, the provider, or the punching bag that they need to be to earn their worth in the world? So if you know a man, or you are a man, it's okay. Please tell a man that it's okay and that they are worthy of love, and they don't have to be. I should add another P, performer. So uh, provider, protector, punching bag, performer. Let them know that they can take a break from those things. And if they choose to pick them back up for some reason, let it be in alignment with that divine pattern that is already inherent within them. And they know what it is when they ask themselves the simple question, how would I like to be treated? That's the other reason why Jesus simplified the thing of like, treat people the way you want to be treated. That's the pattern. You know, if you don't want it to happen to you, don't do it to anybody else. It's that simple. So with that, I think I will take leave and go meditate or something like that. I've been trying to spend a lot more time, because I said I'm studying these unity teachings and stuff like that. I've been spending a lot of time meditating and being in silence, which I used to adore when I was a kid, and I got caught up in the chatter of life. But I'm spending more time. I think being able to hang out with oneself is also a part of developing an intimacy with that divine pattern that's already within you. If you can't sit by yourself and be in your own company, then you probably aren't good company for other people either. So I want to put out there to men too, is to find ways of spending some time with yourself, loving yourself, and allowing yourself to simply be, and trusting that even if you let go, you'll be caught. But you got to let go first. So putting that out there, hopefully it serves somebody. If it serves you, or you think it'll serve somebody else, I encourage you to share it. I will just be continuing to. I'm trying to kind of function from this place of stillness. And there's this Chinese thing called Wu Wei, which is the doing that comes from non-doing. I've been working at that for years and years. It's harder sometimes with a family, but I'm trying to get back to that place. So everything that I'm creating right now, I'm trying to get as still as possible, and then allow whatever emerges to emerge, and to let go of the ideas of what I think things should be or shouldn't be, or when they should be or when they shouldn't be, and just live from the mystery. So that's what I'm trying to do. Hopefully, speaking from this place and from this internal stillness lands with you and reverberates in your being and does some good. So peace, y'all.